Greetings and welcome to session 6 of the Janan International Christian Fellowship Bible Teaching and Leadership Training class of Prophets of the Old Testament. In the first 5 sessions, we did an overview of all of the Old Testament prophets, and we looked at two of the earlier prophets, Elijah and Elisha. Then in the last 3 sessions successively, we've talked about Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. Now today in session 6, we move on to focus on Daniel. Probably my favorite prophet. I'm very inclined to the stories, the narratives from Daniel's life with his friends in Babylon. And of course, who can't be mystified and just compelled by the end times prophecies that Daniel saw and recorded. So let's start with prayer, and then let's move on and spend some time focusing on Daniel and his prophetic ministry. Father, thank you for this opportunity to study your word, to fellowship together in the truth of the Bible, focusing particularly on Daniel, the prophet that you called to make known things that would take place in our day and beyond, and back through the ages, and would set such an example, such an inspiring example of what it is to live for you in a foreign land, in a foreign world, in a world of rebellion, and yet not cave in, not become a part of that rebellion. Teach us from the sacred pages of your word. Show us from the example of Daniel how we can serve you and live for you and prophesy, speak for you, even today. In Jesus' name we ask it. Amen. So Daniel prophesied during the 6th century BCE, and he was taken as a captive to Babylon in the first deportation, 605 BCE. That's when King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon broke the power of Egypt at the Battle of Carchemish, and therefore took as captives whomever he desired from the lands that the Egyptians had been attempting to protect. Daniel was taken along with 3 others. Their Hebrew names, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. We know them better by their Babylonian given names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Daniel's Babylonian given name was Belteshazzar, which loosely translated means lifeguard. But we don't think of him as Belteshazzar. We think of him as Daniel. And we know that he served in the courts of the kings of Babylon and Persia. Excuse me. He was known for his apocalyptic visions and prophetic insights that come in the last 6 chapters. The first 6 chapters are essentially narratives coming from Daniel's life and ministry. The last 6 chapters are prophetic revelations that the Lord gave him through angels. Daniel is referenced in the New Testament. Jesus referred to Daniel's prophecy of the abomination of desolation in Matthew chapter 24, where Jesus is talking to his disciples about the destruction of the temple and what's coming in the future for Israel. He said in verse 15, "So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand." So originally, this desolation, abomination that caused desolation, was the profaning of the Jewish faith and of the temple by Antiochus Epiphanes in the 2nd century. It was looking forward, though, to the ultimate abomination that causes desolation, Jesus was speaking about in the future. And he wanted those who would read Matthew's gospel account to be looking toward that and aware that something very powerful was coming. Daniel as a man was so highly thought of, mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 14, verses 14 and 20, where Ezekiel was talking about the inescapable judgment that was coming upon the people of Judah, and he just added the note that even if Noah, Daniel, and Job were in it, were in this nation about to be condemned, they could save only themselves. Talking about personal responsibility, the need for personal faith and commitment to the one true God. And Daniel definitely was the epitome of that. Personally responsible, faithful to the one true God who called him to be his prophet. Some of the key themes and messages from Daniel's book, or the book bearing his name. A central theme in Daniel is the sovereignty of God over all human kingdoms and history. God made everything. He owns everything. He rules everything. He will judge everything. He will renew all things and make them, restore them to what he made them to be originally. But he is sovereign. And that's important for us to remember when we look out at a world that doesn't look like God's in control, but he is. Behind the scenes and through all of the events taking place, he is controlling where all of this is leading, and his ultimate outcome described in Revelation will take place just as God wills for it to. Faithfulness in exile was another theme. Daniel and his friends exemplified faithfulness to God in the midst of a pagan culture, showcasing the importance of remaining true to one's faith regardless of one's surroundings. We can't control our circumstances, but we can control our faithfulness and devotion to God in the midst of those circumstances. Another key theme and message in Daniel were the apocalyptic visions. This book includes detailed visions of future events symbolizing the rise and fall of empires and the ultimate establishment of God's kingdom, which will reign and rule forever. Another key message and theme is deliverance and protection. Stories of deliverance, miraculous deliverance, demonstrate God's power to protect and to vindicate his faithful servants. Moving on to some of the highlights of the narratives, and I couldn't begin to just pick one or two out. In my estimation, it's important that we look at each one of those. But as we just begin reading, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. The king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring in some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. So, what Babylon did, wisely, whenever they conquered a nation, they didn't just destroy everyone, they looked for some of the most gifted and influential of the young men of that nation and then took them to serve in their own administration, to serve in positions of leadership, hoping to fully saturate them and make them Babylonians. But that wasn't going to happen in the case of Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And that's clear from the very beginning, as verse 8 tells us that Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. And so he asked the chief official for permission not to eat those foods or drink the drinks, things that were forbidden under the Levitical dietary restrictions of Leviticus chapter 11. Now, the king's servant who was in charge of them, Ashpenaz, I believe was his name, was fearful that if he didn't feed them the best food and wine in all of Babylon, that Daniel and his friends would look, if not scrawny, at least less impressive than the other young men who were there. But Daniel assured him. He said, or he challenged him, let's put this to the test. For the next 10 days, give your servants vegetables to eat and water to drink. And then at the end of that time, you compare our appearance to the appearance of those who eat the king's food and drink his wine. And you just go by what you see. And so the servant thought, well, what harm is there going to be in 10 days? Nothing that can't be rectified. But at the end of 10 days, he was surprised to find that Daniel and his friends actually looked brighter and healthier than did the young men who ate the rich food and drank the wine from the king's table. So he took away all that rich food and wine and gave all of them vegetables to eat and water to drink. I sometimes wonder if some of the young men who didn't share Daniel and his friends' faith resented the fact that they didn't get to eat those delicious, not particularly healthy foods anymore. We'll not know. But Daniel just demonstrated right then and there from chapter 1 that while he couldn't control the circumstances of being in a training program in Babylon, he could control what he did with his body and his devotion to his God. Now, that leads into one of the examples, and probably one of the most dramatic examples, along with the fiery furnace that we'll talk about in the next chapter, of God's protection and deliverance and his omniscience. God knows everything. Hebrews 4:13, nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of him to whom we must give an account. And we see that so clearly in this, in chapter 2. In the second year of his reign, we're told Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled and he could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means. Then the astrologers answered the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it. Well, that only makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, even when Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dream, Pharaoh told Joseph the dream, And then Joseph, with the wisdom that God gave him, told Pharaoh what that dream meant. So it's not unreasonable. The unreasonable part comes next. The king replied to the astrologers, "This is what I have firmly decided." So I'm not wavering on this, he said. "If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me." And they go back and forth a little bit. Finally, the astrologers, just in desperation and exasperation, answered the king, "There is not a man on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among men." The Son of God is coming to live among men. We celebrate that at Christmas time. But God can reveal his will to a man. And that's what's about to happen. King Nebuchadnezzar is so furious with his astrologers and his enchanters and diviners, the one we'll call magi in the Christmas story, that he decides to have them all put to death, including all those who were in the training program. That means Daniel and his three friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, are going to be eliminated as well. Nebuchadnezzar is furious. He made up his mind. This is what he's going to do. So he sends guards to the home, to the place where Daniel and his friends are staying, and tells them, "We're here to arrest you and take you off for destruction." And Daniel is confused. This came from out of nowhere. Apparently, God didn't warn Daniel that a flood was coming. And so Daniel asks the guard, "What's going on?" And the guard explains what the king said to his magi, to his attendants, and what happened. And Daniel says, "Well, would you go and ask the king if he'll give me one day? I believe my God will reveal to me the dream the king had and the meaning as well. You just go ask the king for one day, and I'll do what the king is, and I will do what the king has asked." So we go back, give him a day, and Daniel tells his friends, "Guys, we thought it was bad when Babylon came and destroyed Jerusalem and or came to take over our city and take us into exile. This is worse. Our lives are on the line here. We're going to die if the Lord doesn't reveal to us this dream. Pray. Let's pray all night long that the Lord will reveal to us this dream and the meaning of it." And sure enough, during the night, God went to Daniel and gave him the dream and the meaning of it. And Daniel praised God down there in verse 20. "Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He sets up kings and deposes them. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we ask of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king." And so Daniel went to Arioch, and the one that was appointed to execute the wise men said, "Don't execute the wise men. Take me to the king, and I will interpret his dream for him." What's that dream? Well, Daniel began by explaining to the king, "No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about, but there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come. Your dream and the visions that pass through your mind as you lay on your bed are these. As you were lying there, O king, your mind turned to things to come, and the revealer of mysteries showed you what is going to happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than other living men, but so that you, O king, may know the interpretation and that you may understand what went through your mind. You looked, O king, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron, partly of clay. While the statue, while you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, the gold were broken to pieces at the same time and became like chaff on the threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream, and now we will interpret it to you, king. You, O king, are the King of kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds of the air. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are that head of gold. After you, another kingdom will rise, inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Finally, there'll be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for as iron breaks and smashes everything, as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Just as you saw, the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron. So this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some strength of iron, even as you saw, mixed with clay. And just as you saw the iron mixed with clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. That is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of a mountain, but not by human hands. A rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true and the interpretation is trustworthy. Then, and this is the point of it all, the king fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor and ordered that an offering of incense be presented to him. The king said to Daniel, surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and the revealer of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this mystery. So where did Nebuchadnezzar get this crazy idea of somebody telling him his dream and interpreting it? God gave it to him. God put it in his mind. To what end? To destroy the wise men, astrologers? No. But so that the king might know that the one true God has revealed the mystery to him, to his servants, of what is coming in the future, that they may know that there is a God in Israel, that they may know the one true God. That's why God does what he does. That's why God uses us in our relationships, in our ministries, in our service, so that others might know him and trust his son Jesus and come near to him in faith and humility. Now, it sounded like there was like this life-changing conversion for King Nebuchadnezzar, right? Well, Satan is always lurking there, looking for opportunities to deceive. And what did Daniel tell Nebuchadnezzar was his place in that statue? You are the head of gold. Well, that had to really make Nebuchadnezzar feel good about himself. I'm the King of Kings. I'm the shining one at the top. He didn't remember about all of the parts of that gold, silver, bronze, all iron, all that being winnowed out and blown to the wind. He just remembered that he was the head of gold. So along the way, the enemy deceived him into making this giant statue to honor himself, the head of gold. It was 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. He set it up in the plain of Dura, of the province of Babylon, and it's made of solid gold because he's the head of gold, right? And he commanded everyone to bow down and worship that statue of gold, to give him the honor that was due as the King of gold, the King of kings. And so they came to Daniel's friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Where Daniel is, we don't know. Maybe off on some official business. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are commanded to bow down to that idol. We're not going to do it. We're not going to do it. And the king said, when the music plays, you will bow down, or I'll throw you into my fiery furnace. And in verses 17 and 18 of Daniel chapter 3, again, along the ideas of God's divine protection, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of God that you have set up." Now, all of a sudden, remember, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were part and parcel with Daniel in revealing the dream and the great interpretation. But what have you done for me lately? If you're not bowing down and worshiping my idol, you're toast. So he, in his fury, had the fiery furnace stoked and built up 7 times hotter than it usually was. And it was so hot that the guards who threw them in perished because of the flames. Talk about getting picked for the wrong duty. And then Nebuchadnezzar wanted to just sit there and enjoy. Shows his heart not really right, huh? The screams, the pain, the agony of those who refused to submit to him. When he looked inside, all he saw were the 3 men walking around in the midst of the flames like there was no problem. And there was a 4th man who said, "Looks like the son of the gods." I think that's Jesus who's walking in there with him. And so King Nebuchadnezzar, still full of himself, commands them to come out. So they walk out of that fiery furnace. Their clothes are not singed. Scripture says they don't even smell like smoke. And again, the king realizes that he says, "Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut to pieces in their houses. For he is the God of gods. He's the only God to be worshiped and served. He's proven himself a second time to Nebuchadnezzar." And again, is there any situation we end up in life where God cannot protect us, where God cannot defend his children? Obviously, we know no. There's not a circumstance where God can't. Now, he doesn't always deliver his children from their pain and difficulties. All of the disciples, apostles of Jesus, were martyred or put to death for their faith, except for John, and he was banished to the desert isle of Patmos, a prison colony. They had been faithful in their service of proclaiming the gospel and seeing the church spread like wildfire through their time. Totally faithful. But God didn't deliver them from that. But he did ultimately deliver them, and they are with him in paradise. And as Revelation 2:10 says, be faithful even to the point of death, and I'll give you the crown of life. But sometimes God delivers us from fiery trials, from dangers and difficulties. And so we trust him. We praise him. We thank him for being near us and for helping us through whatever difficulties we face. Now, chapter 4 is kind of an unusual chapter. Again, God's obviously working on Nebuchadnezzar's heart. He cares for the lowly, he cares for the kings. And chapter 4 begins, King Nebuchadnezzar, to the peoples, nations, and men of every language who live in all the world, may you prosper greatly. It is my pleasure to tell you about the miraculous signs and wonders that the Most High God has performed for me. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an eternal kingdom. His dominion endures from generation to generation. I, Nebuchadnezzar, being written down at his behest, was at home in my palace, contented and prosperous. I had a dream that made me afraid. As I was lying in my bed, the images and visions that passed through my mind terrified me. So I commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be brought before me to interpret the dream for me. When the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners came, I told them the dream, but they could not interpret it for me. Finally, Daniel came into my presence, and I told him the dream. He is called Belteshazzar, after the name of my God. The spirit of the holy gods is in him. I said, Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians, I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you, and no mystery is too difficult for you. Here is my dream. Interpret it for me. These are the visions I saw while lying in my bed. I looked, and there before me stood a tree in the middle of the land. Its height was enormous. The tree grew large and strong, and its top touched the sky. It was visible to the ends of the earth. Its leaves were beautiful, its fruit abundant, and on it was food for all. Under it, the beasts of the field found shelter, and the birds of the air lived in its branches, and every creature was fed. In the visions I saw while lying in my bed, I looked, and there before me was a messenger, a holy one coming down from heaven. He called out in a loud voice, cut down the tree and trim off its branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from under it and the birds from its branches. Let the stump and its roots be bound with iron and bronze, remain in the ground and in the grass of the field. Let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and let him live with the animals among the plants of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let him be given the mind of an animal till 7 times pass for him. The decision is announced by messengers. The holy ones declare the verdict so that the living may know that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdoms of men and gives them to anyone he wishes and sets them over the lowliest of men. This is the dream that I, King Belteshazzar, had. Now, King Nebuchadnezzar had. Now, Belteshazzar, tell me what it means. And Daniel did. But he did so with fear and trembling. He said, King, I wish this applied to your enemies, because you've been good to me. But it doesn't. It's been spoken against you, that you will uh, You will be drenched with the dew of heaven. You'll live like a wild animal until 7 times pass. The 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge the Most High is sovereign over um, the kingdoms of men and gives authority to anyone he wishes. So, King, when you finally come to the place where you are ready to acknowledge that the one true God is the only God and that he's the one who's sovereign, not you, and you humble yourself before him, then you'll be restored. And sure enough, Nebuchadnezzar loses the mind of a man. He is cast out. He is wandering around like an animal, drenched by dew, living like a homeless vagabond until finally his fingernails and toenails become like talons. His hair becomes like feathers, all gnarled and nasty. And that continues until finally he raised his eyes toward heaven and his sanity was restored, and he praised the Most High and honored and glorified the one who lived forever. Again, that's the point. That's what we're made for, to worship the one true God. And even the king who was the head of gold needs to remember that people don't need to be worshiping him. He needs to be pointing them toward the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the God of gods, the only one who's worthy of our worship, the one who made everything and rules everything and is at the center of all things, Revelation chapters 4 and 5. Now, from that point on, there's no more narratives or stories about Nebuchadnezzar. In fact, we move quickly on into the future to the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar. And it's at a time when Babylon is right near the end of its reign in terms of kingdom. That head of gold is about to pass on to the shoulders of, and the neck and shoulders of silver. And they don't know it. So often the falls of humans, they're deceived from seeing where they are or where they're going. And Belshazzar had a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles. This is in Daniel chapter 5. And they brought in some of the goblets of gold and silver that had been taken from the temple, and they drank from those goblets their wine, and they praised the gods of the Babylonians, the false gods. And so the one true God, the Lord, sent a hand unattached to an arm to write a message of warning, excuse me, and revelation to Belshazzar. And as he saw this hand, he was so frightened by what he saw. And it wrote a message for him, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. And he called in his diviners, his enchanters, his astrologers, and asked them, his wise men, what does this mean? None of them could tell him. And he just continued to quake in fear as he looked at this message that had been painted near the lamp on the wall. I wonder. Anyway, the finally, the king's mother, the wife, said, "O king, live forever. Don't be alarmed. Don't look so pale. There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the time of your father, he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods. King Nebuchadnezzar, your father," actually his grandfather, appointed him chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. This man, Daniel, whom the king called Belteshazzar, was found to have keen mind and knowledge, to send for him that he can tell you what that writing means. So Belshazzar sent for Daniel and brought him in and offered him. He said, I'll make you third highest ruler in my kingdom. I'll have a big chain, gold put around your neck, have you dressed in the finest garb. We'll do it up big. All you have to do is just tell me what this message is. And Daniel answered the king in verse 17, you may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. And we'll know particularly why Daniel felt this way. I mean, he didn't care about what the king had to offer him anyway, but there's something coming that lets you know why the gifts were even more meaningless than usual to someone like Daniel. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means. O king, the Most High God gave your father Nebuchadnezzar sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor. Because of the high position he gave him, all the peoples and nations of men of every language dreaded and feared him. Those the king wanted to put to death, he put to death. Those he wanted to spare, he spared. Those he wanted to promote, he promoted. Those he wanted to humble, he humbled. But when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was deposed from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. He was driven away from the people and given the mind of an animal. He lived with the wild donkeys and ate grass like cattle, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven until he acknowledged that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdoms of men and sets over them anyone he wishes. But you, his son, O Belshazzar, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all this. Instead, you have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You had the goblets from his temple brought to you, and you and your nobles, your wives, and your concubines drank wine from them. You praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which cannot see or hear or understand. But you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all your ways. Therefore, he sent the hand that wrote the inscription. This is the inscription that was written: Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. This is what these words mean. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. 2 times it's firmly decided. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Paris, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. So many means numbered or mina, a unit of money. Tekel can be weighed or can be for shekel. Paris is divided or Persia. The Persians are coming in to take over. And at Belshazzar's command, Daniel's honored, but chapter 5 ends like this. That very night, this is how close destruction was them, and they didn't even know it. That very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. So the Medes and the Persians were the new sheriffs in town. And Darius, recognizing wisdom and influence and authority, took Daniel and put him high up in his administration, made him one of his chiefs, because it was still meritocracy. He deserved it. He earned it. And God gave him that favor, but Daniel showed himself to be wise and talented and disciplined and thoughtful. All the things that you need in a strong leader were seen in Daniel. Now, the people who were under him didn't appreciate having a foreigner, a Jew, who was over them. So they schemed against him. They got Darius to formulate a new law. That law was that if anybody prayed to any other god or any other being for the next month, other than praying to the king, they would be put to death, thrown into the lion's den. Well, they knew perfectly well that Daniel was a man of faith and that 3 times a day he got down on his knees, faced toward Jerusalem, and prayed to his God, the one true God. And he wasn't going to stop. And so the law was passed, couldn't be changed, put in writing. It was firm. But the king didn't know that he had signed a death warrant for Daniel. If he had known that, he wouldn't have done it. And he tried to find every way around it that he possibly could. Nothing that could be done. So he just, as he consigned Daniel to the lion's den, he said, I hope your God will be with you. I hope he'll deliver you from this. And Daniel was thrown in to the lion's den. That night, Darius was beside himself, fearful, grieving, and at the first light of dawn, he had the stone taken away from the lion's den, and he called out and wanted to know if Daniel was okay. Was your God able to deliver you? And Daniel answered him, my God was here. I've just slept with the lions. Soft, cuddly, warm place to be when they're calmed by the maker who controls them. And when the king saw his opening, he took Daniel out of the lion's den, and he took the people who had conspired against him and against Daniel and threw them in. And those hungry lions devoured them like nobody's business. Before they even hit the floor, they were munched, gone. Daniel was devoted to prayer. Didn't matter what the law was. He had to pray. He had to have that fellowship, that connection with the God who made him, with the God who called him to be his prophet and put him in the position he was in, and delivered him and protected him and blessed his life through all of those years of service. So whether we get down on our knees 3 times a day facing the east, or whether we start the day in prayer and end the day in prayer and walk with God in prayer throughout the day, prayer is like oxygen to us. It's breathing for our spirits. You know, without God, we don't have life. We don't have hope. We don't have anything. He is our life, just as he was for Daniel. And Daniel's such a beautiful example of that. And the end of the narratives is a decree from Darius saying to Daniel, may you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. Not Daniel, the God of Daniel. That's what it's about. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So, again, what is this all about? Why did God let his people be exiled? Because he had told them from the very beginning, if you won't obey me in this promised land I've given you, and if you won't follow my law that I've given you, that you said you would obey, I'm going to have you exiled, punished, judged for your failure. That was the old covenant. And so they were taken off. But lest the Assyrians or the Babylonians or the Medes or the Persians or any other of these people think that they were the power, they were in control. No, it's the God of Daniel, the God of Ezekiel, the God of Jeremiah, the God of Isaiah, the God behind the scenes who's sovereign and doing just what his will determined should happen. Now, in the next 6 chapters, Daniel has a series of visions which basically showed him that the final persecution of the Jews before the coming of the Messiah would be under the Grecian Empire. It's yet to come. The Greeks have to conquer the Persians. The persecutor was, in fact, Antiochus Epiphanes from 170 to 164 BCE. That's in chapter 8. The Messiah would come under the next empire, Rome, and would make an end of the Jewish sacrifices by himself being cut off in death. Subsequently, Rome would destroy Jerusalem, Daniel 9:24 through 27. And Daniel also looked on to God's final judgment coming in chapter 12. Let's look at just a couple of those prophecies, what Daniel's seeing and what it means. Let's just start with chapter 7, verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was lying on his bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. Daniel said, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me were the 4 winds of heaven churning up the great sea. 4 great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a man, and the heart of a man was given to it. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, get up and eat your fill of flesh. After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard, and on its back were 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, was given authority to rule. After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth and crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up from among them, and the 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a man and a mouth that spoke boastfully. As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow. The hair of his head was like white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated. The books were opened. And I continued to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain, its body destroyed and thrown in the blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. In my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority and glory and honor and power. All people, nations, and men of every language worshiped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away. His kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. Who is the Son of Man? The one given that honor and glory from the one true God? It's our Messiah, our Savior, our Lord, King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, Jesus Christ. And his will be an everlasting kingdom. All of the kingdoms of men will become the kingdom of our God, and he shall reign forever and ever. That's why we celebrate Christmas. It's setting in motion that ultimate victory, in which those who have faith in Jesus will revel and rejoice. In chapter 8, There's this strange vision of a ram and a goat charging each other and battling against each other. Um, the interpretations given to Daniel in beginning in verse 15, I, Daniel, was watching the vision, trying to understand it. There before me stood one who looked like a man, and I heard a man's voice from the Ulai saying, Gabriel, tell this man the meaning of the vision. So there's the angel Gabriel, who's supposed to share with Daniel what the vision was all about. He said it concerns the end of time, the things that were frankly beyond Daniel that he wouldn't be around to see, but that we may be experiencing or may have happened between then and now. There are people a lot smarter than me that understand some of these prophecies or think they understand them. I guess one day we'll finally know when the Lord tells us about all of the fulfillments, and there may have been multiple fulfillments in some of these things. Chapter 9, again, talks about things moving up to the time of Jesus and what Jesus would do. Verse 20, while I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and making my request to Yahweh, my God, for his holy hill, while I was still in prayer, Gabriel, the man I had seen earlier, but he didn't realize, I guess, that Gabriel was an angel, I was still in prayer, came to me in a swift flight by the time of the evening sacrifice. He instructed me and said to me, Daniel, I have now come to give you insight and understanding. As soon as you began to pray, an answer was given, which I have come to tell you, for you are highly esteemed. Therefore, consider the message and understand the vision. 77s of years, that'd be about 490 years, are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to the sin of the holy people, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know and understand this, from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. So 69 times 7, about 483 years there. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble, ruled by the Romans. After the 62 sevens, the anointed one will be cut off and have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Rome ultimately destroyed Jerusalem. Leveled it, as Jesus said about the temple, not one stone left standing on another. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1/7. So now we're looking to a 7-year period at the end of time. I believe it's spoken about in the book of Revelation. But in the middle of that 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. The one who causes desolation will place abominations on a wing of the temple until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. Now, Jesus did bring an end to the need for sacrifice and offerings by offering himself. He was the fulfillment of all sacrifices, of all offerings, giving himself to God for our sin, for our transgression, for our guilt, our shame, our eternal punishment, so that through trusting in him, sin would be put to an end. One interesting thing from Daniel chapter 10, and then we'll move toward the end and kind of wrap this up. Verse 7, I, Daniel, was the only one who saw the vision. The men with me did not see it, but such terror overwhelmed them that they fled and hid themselves. So I was left alone, gazing at the great vision. I had no strength left. My face turned deathly pale, and I was helpless. Then I heard him speaking, and as I listened to him, I fell into a deep sleep, my face to the ground. A hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. He said, Daniel, you who are highly esteemed, consider carefully the words I'm about to speak to you and stand up, for I have now been sent to you. And when he said this to me, I stood up trembling. Then he continued, do not be afraid, Daniel, since the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to them. But the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me because I was detained there with the king of Persia. Now I have come to explain to you what will happen to your people in the future, for the vision concerns a time yet to come. Wow. So here is apparently Gabriel telling Daniel from the day he requested God's help, Gabriel was sent, but he got held up by the king of Persia? Is the literal king, or is this looking in the spirit realm, the battle between angels and demons? What's going on? That's what's often thought, because Michael, the chief prince, another one of the archangels, shows up to assist Gabriel and get him free so he can go to Daniel, and then he shows up before Daniel to tell him what the dream means. So there's this idea of spiritual warfare. I don't know how we would participate in that other than resisting the evil one and holding fast to our God and using the weapons we're given of prayer and the scripture and faith, putting on that full armor of God that Ephesians chapter 6 talks about. But it does stir the mind to think about the potential of what excuse me, can take place, is taking place, what God is doing behind the scenes, all that's happening. We see what's going on in this realm, and so much of this we miss, but there's a whole other spirit realm that we don't see. And amazing things are happening there as well. So we go to the end, Daniel chapter 12, where it's he kind of tries to put a bow on this, but it's not nice and simple. At that time, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise. There will be a time of distress such as not happened from the beginning of the nations until then. But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, Revelation chapter 20, verse 15, will be delivered. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness like stars forever and ever. Imagery Paul used in Philippians chapter 2. But you, Daniel, close up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end. Many will go here and there to increase knowledge. There has been a huge increase in information and knowledge, certainly in our day, and the internet proliferates that. Then I, Daniel, looked, and there before me stood two others, one on this bank of the river, one on the opposite bank. One of them said to the man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river, how long will this be before these astonishing things are fulfilled? The man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river lifted his right hand and his left hand toward heaven. I heard him swear by him who lives forever, saying, it will be for a time, times, and half a time. When the power of the holy people has finally been broken, all these things will be completed. I heard, but I did not understand. So I asked my Lord, what will the outcome of all this be? He replied, go your way, Daniel, because the words are closed up and sealed till the end of time. Many will be purified, made spotless, and refined, but the wicked will continue to be wicked. None of the wicked will understand, but those who are wise will understand. From the time the daily sacrifice is abolished, And the abomination that caused desolation is set up. There will be 1,290 days. Blessed is the one who waits for and reaches the end of 1,335 days. As for you, go on your way till the end. You will rest, and then at the end of the days, you will rise to receive your allotted inheritance. So Daniel's kind of beside himself. He's trying to process, trying to figure this out, trying to understand. And the angel just basically tells him, you can't. This is for the end of time. And you're just going to go your way. And in your time, you'll be raised up to your allotted inheritance, the inheritance that we have through faith in Jesus. Brings us to the conclusion of Daniel's life and ministry. His life, his prophecies offer profound insights into the sovereignty of God, his faithfulness, the ultimate triumph of his kingdom, his steadfast faith in the face of adversity, and detailed apocalyptic visions have left a lasting impact on both Jewish and Christian eschatology, study of the end things. The book of Daniel remains a powerful testament to God's control over history and his promises of deliverance and restoration for his people. That is what we look forward to and long for. And may you, in the peace that comes through Jesus, who said, peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give as the world gives. So don't let your hearts be troubled. Don't be afraid. Look at the story of Daniel and be at peace. Be full of faith and courage as you face a future where God is in control and his will be done on earth, even as it's done in heaven. God bless you.